Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. "Sir, may I wake your dead daughter?" The sentence landed in the large glass-walled room like a stone in a still lake. Ethan Montgomery, a businessman known for his ruthless contracts and impeccably clean hands, swallowed hard. Around him, the advisors tensed, the secretary stifled a cry, and security wondered if it was a joke. The woman facing him wore neither makeup nor a suit. Her hair was tangled, her coat threadbare, and her hands marked by winter and hardship. Yet, nothing in her voice hinted at madness, calm, clear, as if the phrase had been repeated 1,000 times until she knew its truth. Lily Montgomery, his only daughter, wasn't dead in the way the word is understood in public discourse. For 6 months she had been in a deep sleep following an accident. Doctors spoke of coma, brain damage, hope reduced to the cultivation of cautious words. Costly treatments followed one after another in silent units. The press whispered, Ethan's impeccably ordered life had cracked. The woman's presence on the doorstep of his office, in the heart of the financial district, and her abrupt request were both an insult and an invitation. Ethan, made of glass and steel, felt for the first time that money didn't rule everything. The insult turned to curiosity, and curiosity, when fueled by despair, becomes decisive. He accepted, without knowing why. Perhaps because his heart, hidden behind accounts and appointments, was beating in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps because the very idea of attempting the impossible was more bearable than remaining still. And perhaps, and this was the truth he would only allow himself to whisper, because he preferred to believe a stranger than to hear yet another medical statistic. They set off for the hospital like two strangers caught up in the same emergency. In front of the automatic door of the neurology unit, Nora Hayes, the homeless woman, placed her hand on the cold metal, inhaled, and said in a voice that no longer allowed for refusal, "Let me try." The intensive care unit smelled of disinfectant and the false promise of machines. Ethan followed Nora through a maze of corridors where his daughter's name was whispered as if defying her would make things better. Lily lay in a private room, her pale face framed by wires and sensors. The steady rhythm of the monitor was the only real conversation. The millionaire watched, holding back his tears as one might hold back accounts. His hands searched for an imaginary handle. He thought back to the evening of the accident, the ringing phone, the blue lights, the medical staff speaking in technical terms. Since then, the house had become a silent mausoleum, as if money had built a sanctuary but forgotten the key to its door. Nora stepped forward without being pushy. She placed an old leather box on the table, opened it, and took out a small violin and a faded bow. Ethan instinctively recoiled. What did she know about music, medicine, or his daughter? But his fingers gripped the edge of the leather chair. He had let a stranger in. The woman closed her eyes before Lily's bed, placed her fingers on the hospital table as if exploring a secret musical score. Then she began to play, first hesitant notes, then an ancient, simple melody, a lullaby that seemed to come from another century. The notes weren't perfect, they were rough, inhabited, and contained something more powerful than technique, a compassion honed over years. Ethan felt something crack inside him. It wasn't just the music that troubled him, but the way Nora played it, as if she were speaking directly to Lily's soul, bypassing the father's steely defenses. The monitor beeped, unchanging. The room remained silent. Yet, deep within Ethan, a glimmer of hope began to stir. As the lullaby faded into the room, Ethan watched the woman. She was neither mad nor a charlatan, she carried with her years of loss and humble wisdom. When she finished, she laid down the bow and softly told her truth. Nora had once been a music therapist at a rehabilitation center. She worked with children, the elderly, and accident victims. Life had taken its toll, a series of mistakes, a nighttime addiction to numb the pain, and then life on the streets. But music, she said, had never left her. She knew the power of repetition, of familiar rhythms, and of melodies etched deep in memory. She spoke of a boy in a state hospital she had once helped, not with a degree, but with her presence, and of a mother who, bearing a name she would rather not repeat, had found her child through a repeated song. "It's not magic," "Sir," she said. "It's memory. Sometimes, when you find the door right next to your heart, your soul answers." Ethan, who had never known the streets or hunger, didn't know what to make of these confessions. He felt a mixture of admiration and suspicion, admiration because the woman had managed to maintain an unsuspected strength, suspicion because everything in his life had taught him to doubt empty promises. But he remembered Lily, her voice, her laughter, the way she loved the rain. And for the first time in months, he admitted that hope, however fragile, was worth pursuing. Nora rummaged through her box and pulled out a worn notebook. On the first page were scribbled notes and crossed-out words: Lily, rain, bellflower. Ethan shuddered. How could that name be there? He had never spoken to an audience, he had never sung about his daughter in the street. The woman smiled sadly and explained that she hadn't guessed the name. She had heard the news, the radio reports, Ethan's shaky interviews. She had heard about a little girl who loved an old song, a lullaby her mother used to hum by a lake. The radio reports and articles left their mark, fragments that Nora kept like talismans. What she shared next was no longer a bluff. She knew the song Lily's mother sang at bedtime. It was an Irish lullaby that many families had adopted over the decades, and one that Nora had learned as a child. She asked permission to sing it, not just play it. Ethan felt that taking that step would cost him what little dignity he had left. But he looked at the room where his daughter, motionless, seemed to float between two worlds, and he gave in. Nora's voice was husky and tender. The simple lyrics spoke of a lake, the wind, and a flower waiting for the light. The melody filled the room. Something happened when no one expected it. Lily's breathing changed, not enough to alert the doctors, but just enough to make the moment tangible. The monitor noted a slight slowing and adjusted its pace. Ethan felt his hands tremble. The lullaby had opened a tiny window. It wasn't a definitive awakening, but it was an answer. He understood that what was at stake transcended his skepticism. It was pure chance. He took Nora's hand without realizing it. The following days unfolded like a series of small battles, with the medical staff, with the banks, with family councils, and with the press, which sensed a scoop. Nora simply asked for permission to come every day, to set up her violin by the bed, and to sing. The doctors, professional and weary, reluctantly agreed, provided it didn't compromise her care. Ethan negotiated a space of tolerance. He signed forms, paid extra for the private room, and set up logistics to preserve privacy. But beyond the organization, something changed within him. He stopped treating every decision as a transaction. He structured his days around an unusual schedule: Nora's visits. Nora, for her part, didn't claim to possess a miracle cure. She repeated songs, spoke softly to Lily, and brought back fragments of the outside world: the sound of a bus, the description of an August sky, the way children shouted. She illuminated the environment with the memory of simple things. And each time, Ethan watched for the slightest spark. There were false hopes, days when the monitor reacted to the slightest modulation, moments when Lily's face seemed less peaceful, as if she were fighting off a violent dream. But there were also small victories: a shiver, a blink, a deeper sigh. Each of these moments became a treasure. Ethan found himself waiting. At 6 a.m., he sometimes went down to the hall to smoke a cigarette, clutching a cup of overly strong coffee. He watched Nora, who talked to the nurses and sometimes laughed, as if she had returned from another world. Without realizing it, he began to call her by her first name. The established routine allowed for confidences to emerge. Dr. Caroline Reynolds, the chief neurologist, was honest. She explained the medical limitations: Lily's coma presented with diffuse lesions, and there was no definitive protocol for waking someone up. But she also acknowledged what her colleagues had observed: music and emotional stimulation could trigger responses. "We can't promise a miracle," she said, "but we can allow the family to try everything as long as it doesn't harm the patient." This framework allowed Ethan to continue, but posed a new question: why had he agreed to let a homeless woman do this work in his place? A cruel answer came to him: because one could be alone, in the midst of a fortune, and no longer know who to turn to for help. But deep down, he discovered another truth: Nora brought something that money couldn't buy, a raw humanity, a way of speaking to memory as if it were alive. One evening, while waiting for Dr. Reynolds to leave, Ethan opened up more than he had intended. He recounted Lily's childhood, the first time she had sung at one of his cafes, the rage and guilt he had felt driving her that night. He spoke of the accident, the sirens, and the ringing of a telephone that had changed his life. The confession relieved him and exposed him. Nora listened without judgment. She sometimes asked a question, not to attack, but to understand. Understanding, Ethan thought, is the first step toward healing. Time ceased to be linear. The hours became divided into before the song and after the song. Ethan's friends stopped calling him, his presence at the helm of his business became sporadic. He brought in specialists, bought state-of-the-art equipment, but it wasn't the machines that forged patience, it was Nora's perseverance. She sang songs Lily had loved as a child, sometimes onomatopoeic, sometimes improvised tunes. She also talked to Lily about trivial things, the rain on the roof of their imaginary house, the taste of strawberries, the sound of a squeaking bicycle. Every detail sought to evoke a fragment of everyday life. One night, while Nora was playing, Lily moved purposefully, her fingers gripped the fabric of the blanket. It was a small gesture, almost laughable to an outsider, but for Ethan it was like seeing his daughter's hand through the glass of an aquarium. He wept, without restraint. The news was recorded, studied, and published in a discreet little paragraph by a local journalist who happened to be passing by the hospital. The city spoke. Some doubted, others saw a story of rebirth. Organizations offered Nora their help, others tried to take advantage of the situation. Ethan had to protect the fragile thread that connected his daughter to the world. But it was the nights of waiting that left the deepest mark. They forged a strange family, Ethan, Nora, a few loyal nurses, and Lily's motionless figure. They shared a silent purpose, no one thought the road would be short. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor walked through the hospital doors, Marcus Blake, Lily's former driver, the one who was driving the car the night of the accident. His face bore the weariness of repressed guilt. He came with papers, memories, and a clumsy desire to redeem himself. Marcus confessed what he had kept silent about. He had neglected the vehicle's maintenance because he was going through a difficult financial period. This confession opened a wound in the Montgomery family. Ethan was initially angry, then moved to pity. Forgiveness is never immediate, it is woven over time, through actions. Nora, who knew the power of stories, spoke to Ethan about the difference between guilt and responsibility. She wasn't trying to excuse Marcus, but to untie the knot that bound their hearts. She explained how shame could paralyze more surely than a coma. This visit brought other memories to the surface, domestic arguments, broken promises, evenings when work was chosen over being present. Ethan then understood that waking Lily was not just a medical act, it was an invitation to wake himself up. 6 months and a few days after the accident, something rare happened. A sentence, almost inaudible, slipped from Lily's lips. Not a conscious word, not a declaration, but a vocal breath that carried a single syllable, Daddy. The room exploded with muffled sounds, the machines beeped, a nurse called out, Dr. Reynolds trotted in. Ethan rushed to the bed and took his daughter's warm hand. The word was fragile as a twig, but it contained everything, the undeniable evidence of a bond that endured. The subsequent tests were cautious. Neurology spoke of partial recovery, implicit memory, and how emotion could reawaken connections. The specialists took notes and theorized. For Ethan, science mattered little, the word, Dad, shook an empire and restored him to himself. Nora, who was standing at the back of the room, smiled silently. She made no claim. That first word belonged to Lily, and no one else. Yet she knew the road ahead would be long, to articulate, to recognize, to rebuild. But the word was a beginning, the word that marks a crossing. Lily's recovery became a painstaking process. Physiotherapy, cognitive rehabilitation, neurological tests, everything unfolded in a meticulously timed ballet. Ethan, now less constrained by his arrogance, became involved in a different way. He hired therapists, organized a schedule, but above all, learn to listen. Nora continued to be a presence. Little by little, society softened around her. Neighbors brought her clean clothes, an organization found her temporary housing, and some anonymous donor sent contributions for her needs. Ethan, in a gesture he wouldn't have considered before, employed Nora part-time to work with the hospital patients, not as a favor, but because he had seen the power of her character. This job was a step towards rehabilitation, a regular salary, a clean bed, the chance to regain her dignity. Nora wasn't saved by the philanthropy of a wealthy person, she had been recognized for her skills. It was a form of justice more subtle than any charity. Lily, on the other hand, progressed slowly. Some memories returned, others remained hazy. She began to laugh sometimes, to cry sometimes, and to get annoyed with the world's imperfections. Ethan's role changed, he became guardian, accomplice, and, little by little, a true father. The press returned, more ferocious, more inquisitive. Some media outlets sought to turn the story into a spectacle, a miraculously homeless woman, a transformed millionaire. Others accused Nora of strategy, insinuating that she was seeking a steady income or recognition. The rumors hurt. Ethan faced the journalists with a new stance, honesty. He refuted sensational theories, defended Nora, and acknowledged his own naivete. The truth he embraced made him more human in the eyes of those willing to see. Some mocked him, others praised him. Nora, for her part, refused interviews. She refused public pity and media acclaim. For her, victory lay in that morning when Lily had laughed naturally, without being prompted by a camera. Regaining her privacy was worth more than any press coverage. The outside world, however, is not kind to stories that resist simple frameworks. But sometimes simplicity breaks down and gives way to a gentler reality, the complex truth of partial healing and human reconstruction. Over the months, the Montgomery family rebuilt itself. Rituals emerged, breakfast together, slow walks in the park, music always playing. Lily learned to put words to her fears. Ethan learned not to try to control everything. Nora learned to regain her self-confidence. There were dark days, relapses, tests that indicated a ceiling for certain functions. But there were also moments of grace, Lily taking Nora's hand and squeezing it like a greeting to an ally, Marcus coming to work repairing the family's cars, Dr. Reynolds smiling at the sight of a progress curve. Ethan, transformed without relinquishing his business acumen, created a foundation to support unconventional therapies in neurology and offered scholarships to formerly homeless people with useful skills but no access to the job market. He didn't erase everything that had made him who he was, but he put people back at the heart of certain decisions. Nora found a father figure in Ethan and a loyal friend in Lily. She worked with a multidisciplinary team and became the go-to person for complex cases. She had paid a high price for her knowledge, the streets, loneliness, and fear, but she had turned it into strength. One bright morning, as autumn leaves began to scatter across the sidewalk, Lily opened her eyes clearly. It wasn't a divine flash of insight, it was a process, an accumulation. She uttered a complete sentence, "Mommy, tell me the story of the lake again." Ethan felt his heart crack in a healing way. He knew that Lily's mother, who had died years earlier, spoke through her daughter's memories. Lily's plea wasn't just to her absent mother, it was to memory itself, to continuity. The city followed this progression with a mixture of interest and resignation. For Ethan, the victory wasn't complete, but it was real. He gave thanks more often, apologized when necessary, and learned to let things go. Nora, whose voice had begun the awakening, sought no glory. She continued to visit hospitals, sometimes in public, sometimes in silence. She never claimed credit for the miracle, the word was an impostor, the true act was her tireless presence. A few months later, in a small private ceremony, Ethan appointed Nora director of a reintegration program. This was not a mercenary gesture but a commitment, to give a chance to those whom life had pushed off course. The initial question, "May I awaken your dead daughter?" contained a boldness worth hearing. It wasn't a promise of omnipotence, but a proposition of humanity, to try, to repeat, to listen. The dead girl was, in truth, asleep in layers of pain and solitude, she had responded to the music, to the voice, and above all, to the constancy of a presence. Ethan understood something essential: wealth is only useful if it serves healing. Nora understood that one can become oneself again when given a second chance, not through grace, but through work and gratitude. Lily understood, as the conversation unfolded, that memories never leave anyone truly alone. In the city, people went on with their lives, some delighted, others skeptical. But everywhere the lullaby had been sung, a small opening remained, the possibility that music, presence, and dignity could awaken not only bodies, but families, hearts, and lives. The final image is simple: an open window on an October morning, a girl stretching and asking for a story, a father telling it, and, in the doorway, a woman with a violin smiling. What has been awakened is not just Lily, it is the capacity of humans to find the humanity in one another.